is a game-based social emotional learning curriculum where we cater to grades 3 to 12, and we focus on leadership, innovation, and emotional intelligence. And today we're talking about, as I was mentioning, we're talking about a very important topic, and that's something that I believe we're all delving more into. And I think it has affected all of our lives in different manners, in a very different way, right? Altogether, we're talking more about how generative AI will revolutionize education. And so today we've got Mr. Christian Talbot, who's the president and CEO of the Middle States Association Commissions on Elementary and Secondary Schools, which is one of the original education accreditors. He is also the co-founder of Juno, which is a strategy plus design consultancy. He was previously the president of Regis High School in New York, Regis High School in New York, and the head of school at Malvern Prep. He incubated the Center of Social Impact at Malvern and later founded the Expeditionaries, a social entrepreneurship boot camp for middle school and high school students. And he now continues to teach through his work in the nonprofit leadership program at the University of Pennsylvania. He has served on the board of trustees of several independent schools and previously served as a mentor in the Penn's Education Entrepreneurship Program. So thank you, Christian, for allowing us and for being here and allowing us to listen to you. So go ahead.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to speak with you all, and the topic is something that we are spending a lot of time on here at Middle States, so it's a great moment for us to chat.
Absolutely. And I think we can directly delve into what generative AI is, right? It would be great if you can just, right away begin with what is your understanding of generative AI and how at this point it has entered into the field of education sector.
Yeah, it's a great place to start, Chelsea. So generative AI right now is most popularly associated with large language models, although it is more than that. So if you've used or heard of ChatGPT or Bing Chat or Google's Bard or Anthropic's Claude, and there's a few others, these are essentially chatbots. They're trained on massive amounts of text, often from the publicly available internet, as well as some other private sources. And much like typical AI, there is a form of machine learning, as well as other types of training that enable the artificial intelligence to talk back to us and give us answers that are generative or creative, meaning there's not a set kind of right or wrong fill in the blank answer. Instead, these large language models appear to be generating in real time original, sometimes weird and creative ideas. But generative AI also refers to image creation as well. And so there are tools like Midjourney or Runway. DALL-E was probably the most popular original one. And these allow the ordinary user like you and me to put some text into a box and out comes an image or even a video in the case of Runway. And these are breakthroughs. We've never had anything like these before. The original chatbot in AI is actually about 60 years old, goes back to the 1960s, the MIT, what would eventually become the Media Lab at MIT. Someone produced a chatbot called Eliza, and it's actually a really interesting story. At the time, people who interacted with Eliza couldn't distinguish that chatbot from a real person. And I think today, if we were to play with that original version of Eliza, we would see just how primitive it is compared to what's available. So the concept isn't new, but the extent of its ability and power is pretty stunning.
Absolutely. And I think the ones that you've mentioned, I think they're the ones that are most popular at this point, right? They're the ones everyone's heard of. It's something that has also come into question with how certain states have also banned the use of certain generative AI tools. right? And just wanted to delve more into how do we inculcate generative AI into education, right? And when we talk about revolutionizing education, right, using these tools, I think there also comes a lot of responsibility with using these tools, right? So if
Yeah.
you could give me your inputs on those.
Yeah, so it's a huge set of questions you just asked, and I'll probably say a bunch of things. So when I'm done talking, you can pull on the thread that most makes the most sense to you. But um, I think the first thing I would say is I would warn against uh, anyone thinking about how to integrate these things into learning, as opposed to thinking about what great learning looks like, and then thinking about how these tools can support that vision for great learning. And the reason I want to start there is because the history of educational technology, if you go back, roughly 30 years, is about schools in particular
I'm
take
listening to a Zoom as I'm doing lunch training.
um, is about schools taking a new technology like the internet or smart boards, fill in the blank with your favorite ed tech tool, and just absorbing it into the way that school had always worked before. And often it kind of reproduced and replicated the existing paradigm. And to be sure, there are plenty of things about school that are good and even great sometimes, but there are also lots of things about the way that school works that I would characterize as, minimally antiquated. And I think the crisis of identity that instructors of writing are having with large language models is a good example of, like, how do you teach writing now when students have access to something like ChatGPT? So it may be that some of our modes of assessment and lesson design are antiquated. And then it might also be that some of the things that we do in schools are actually broken. So I would say, for example, that if you're using, certain types of assessment, like multiple choice assessments, for anything other than very quick, formative, snapshot understanding of where a student is and where they might pivot to, if you're using that to put grades in a grade book and doing that over time, that's a broken form of assessment, and it's really not serving a student's growth and development. So again, I want to start by arguing that there's a real danger in this moment that generative AI could be used to reinforce and even extend antiquated or broken models of learning that typically take place in schools, but also might take place in tutoring centers or in the learning that kids do outside of school, students do outside of school. But when we get past that notion, it's also an opportunity for us to say, these tools, these generative AI tools, are unbelievably powerful. And I think we are at the very beginning of the beginning of the beginning of understanding of what they're capable of doing, which is the perfect opportunity for us to say something like, now that we can do anything, what do we really want to do? And to put a finer point on it, now that students can do anything with these tools, what does the world need them to do? What should they and ought they to do from a moral and ethical standpoint? And then what do we want to encourage them to do? And I don't know anybody who has really great answers to all of those questions, because we're just starting to ask the questions. But I think that's the right set of questions to be asking, I think. And then the last thing I'll say, and then again, I want you to, Chelsea, to pull on some of the threads here, is that, and I'm speaking only for myself and for Middle States as an organization. We have 3,000 schools in 115 countries around the world. Something like 2.2 million students are members of our schools around the world. And one thing that we feel pretty strongly about is that students are in our schools in order to become fully integrated human beings, which is why social emotional learning is so important, so that they can go out into the world and contribute to the common good. Now, the common good for one student might be taking care of their family, but there's a purpose there that's bigger than that one student. For another student, it might be their local community, their national community, could be something that's a issue facing the entire world. But an education is instrumental insofar as it helps a student to work toward, from our point of view, a contribution to the common good. And so actually in 2 days, I'm going to a school in North Carolina to do a social entrepreneurship design sprint. And the students will identify a problem that matters to them. They'll frame that problem, conceptualize a solution, and then prototype something for presentation to a CEO panel. But they're going to use generative AI to assist them in that. And it'll be interesting to see how they use it as a brainstorming tool, as a way to kind of find adjacent creative spaces that they wouldn't otherwise have thought about. It might accelerate their ability to create, if not visual prototypes, maybe even actual working prototypes. And that's exciting because it means that what it used to take me a week to do with students, they might be able to do in a few hours. So that's a direct application of what we picture as the purpose of learning, right? Preparing students to be fully integrated human beings who contribute to the common good. An application to a very specific kind of learning situation, which is what's a problem that matters to me and what can I do about it? And then actually give them the space and the tools to work on it. And that's not typically how school works, but it does strike us as a really worthy use of generative AI tools.
Absolutely. I think I'm taking back a lot of points that you've mentioned, right? Because you were answering a bunch of questions from my end. So I think just to begin with, I think one of the things you mentioned right at the beginning was about how certain learning methods, not just learning methods, but also methods of assessment have also become antiquated, right? Um, in the way where not only taking these assessments, but also in the way where looking at the end outcome of these assessments, right? So I think the mindset probably has shifted from just filling up grade books to becoming more research oriented to see what is the end outcome of what we're trying to build at the end of the day. And I think I would just like to connect it with something that you were talking about later about how social emotional learning is something that I think every school is trying to focus on in different ways, right? The terminology might change and the terminology might evolve. It might be called character education, it might be called, you know, health and wellness classes. But at the end of the day, it's each child's well being that the schools are now focusing on. And I think with the something that you also mentioned, that with the integration, won't say integration, but also the input of generative AI as a brainstorming tool, right? And not as something that is used primarily to create these structures. I think that's a beautiful thought that you've brought in here. That and I think one of the best questions that I'm taking back is, what do we want these students to take, right? What do we want students to do now that they're able to utilize these different generative AI tools, right?
Yeah. So, Chelsea, in some ways, nothing really essential has changed about our goal as educators. And what I mean specifically is, if I'm a teacher, the only way that I know that a student has learned something is if they can transfer their understanding from one situation to another. If a student can answer a fill in the blank question or a multiple choice question, I don't know for sure that they've learned something. Maybe they have, but I can't say that for sure. But if I see a student be presented with or select their own new problem that they've never thought about before, never seen before, and if they can show me how they can solve that problem using things that they learned somewhere else, then I know that they've learned. And I think generative AI is really interesting because in the very name, generative, there is this notion of creativity. And creativity and creating things is not the only way for students to show us that they can transfer their learning from one situation to another, but it's a great way for them to do it. It's a deeply engaging way for them to do it. And now with generative AI tools, it's easier than it's ever been. So I'll go back to the example I gave in a couple of days when I run this social entrepreneurship design sprint. One of the tasks that the students will have is to illustrate through storyboarding a day in the life of the person for whom they're trying to create a solution. And previously, unless one of the students on a team was a really good artist, they were drawing stick figures, or they had to pull, stock photos that couldn't be manipulated or changed in any way. But now with ChatGPT-4 or Bing Chat or DALL-E, students can just type in the scene that they want, and they might have to play around with it a little bit, but within a couple of minutes, they can have the image for the storyboard exactly as they want it, so that when they present their problem and solution set, it's really clear to the audience, okay, here's how they frame the problem, here's how the solution works, and here's what life looks like afterwards. And so the fidelity or the resolution of their understanding will come through much more clearly and much faster using these tools. So they're demonstrating their learning, and these tools allow them to do it faster and more clearly than we would have otherwise been able to see. And I think that's a really, really powerful opportunity for us as educators.
Absolutely. I completely agree about how whatever they're learning, it needs to be applied in some form or the other. And that application is something that educators look forward to, right? And
Yeah.
whether it's in the form of formative assessments, or whether it's in the form of assignments where they have to go out in the world and really apply that learning, something like what you're going to be doing with the social entrepreneurship program. And I think that in itself becomes a capstone project, right? Whenever we're
Yep.
talking about social emotional learning, right, at the end of the day we want them to yeah and at the end of the day we want them to be taking whatever they're learning back to their real lives, right? And
Yeah.
the use of generative AI, as you mentioned, is to generate curiosity as well, right? And not just creativity, but it's also to generate that sense of curiosity and creativity that they're able to uh, as you mentioned, contribute to the greater good.
Yeah. I'll also say that this is something that worries me too, this being student social emotional well-being in the context of generative AI. So it's sort of an unpleasant reality, but a lot of preteens and teenagers interact with fully virtual characters, whether it's through character.ai or on Snapchat or other applications. And these, I'll call them personas, are kind of indistinguishable in a lot of ways from real people. So when I think about the students, again, who are in the Middle States Network, these are all kids they're almost all under the age of 18, right? They're still developing, they're still figuring out who they are. And this is uncharted territory for us. In the history of humankind, we've only had human development in the context of other human beings. And now there are interactive agents, if you will, these AI personas who can simulate human intimacy. I don't mean physical intimacy, I mean psychological and emotional intimacy, but it's a simulation. It's not the real thing. And I worry about, what will that do to a young person's development? On one hand, I think there could be use cases where it's actually really helpful for a kid who's got social anxiety, and they can practice maybe with an avatar. But does that also develop a codependence or an over-reliance on that? The other thing, and I was just talking about this with a colleague the other day, the other thing that I think is a subtle but pernicious danger with chatbots is, it doesn't matter which one you use. You put in your text, when you hit enter, you get a response back in seconds, sometimes almost instantly. And the truth is that in social situations, sometimes people don't respond right away, or there's a pause, but you're reading their body language or their facial expressions, their tone of voice matters, right? All these things are stripped out of a young person's interactions with generative AI. And again, this is uncharted territory. Maybe my worries are unfounded, but I do worry about what that will do to the psychological development, the social and emotional development of a young person. And these kids are at the most formational period of their lives, right? This is the crucible of their formation. So that is something that does worry me.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think one of the major things that we keep talking about also, because since Tomoclub uses games, I think one of the major questions that keep coming up to at least with us is why games, right? And because parents are trying to get their kids off of their laptops, they're trying to get them off of playing video games, or at least for a majority of people that we've interacted with. Uh, but everything in the amount that is required. I think anything in excess, it doesn't help anyone, right? As you mentioned, that there is definitely that worry that anything can be abused, right? Any AI tool can be abused to the point where even if, say, I need to create an entire research project, I can go on ChatGPT. Of course, leveraging your tools is absolutely important. How do you leverage those tools is what matters. How do you draw the line between access, and how do you draw the line between access and the application of your own learning and thinking, right?
Yeah, those are really tricky questions. When it comes, I do want to say a word about games. Most kids have access to games, at least here in the United States. I don't know if that's true of every place in the world, but I think there's something very clever, and I mean that as a compliment to Tomoclub, using games, because humans are not the only animals that learn through games, right? There's a huge number of species in the animal kingdom that learn through play. And humans especially learn through play. Even adults learn through play. There's a difference between finite games and infinite games, and we could talk about the difference there and how that might apply with generative AI. But I think leveraging play is an awesome idea for making good use of generative AI in service of social emotional learning. So, contrary to, I think, a parent's fear that maybe they're spending too much time on video games, if it's the type of game that's actually teaching them how to develop locus of control or executive functioning skills, or to think about, do I want to collaborate in this moment, or do I need to go off and kind of get things done first? Those are all really great lessons to learn. And if it comes in the form of a game, I mean, we know through research that, through a game, you'll learn something like 7 times faster than if you did it in any other fashion. So I think it's very shrewd that Tomoclub is taking that approach.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Christian, and thanks for complimenting Tomoclub for its for the tool that we're using, for sure. I think we do have a few questions in the chat box, which we'll get to right away, I think, because we don't have as much time as we'd like. But so one of the questions is, in the upcoming exercise that you'll be doing for the students, what are your thoughts as to capturing and measuring improvements?
Sure. So I think this question is about the social coming exercise. And it's a great question, first of all, let me say that, Scott. So thank you for that question. And second, the design of that day, just one full school day, is that the students end the day with, there will be 3 teams of students, and they will all, each of the 3 teams will present their problem and solution set to a CEO panel. So they're going to get feedback from this panel, but there were also going to be teachers and fellow students in the audience and parents in the audience. So it's a demonstration of learning, which to me is also a high fidelity version of assessment. And in order to get to that final stage, they're going to do 3 practice rounds. And after each practice round, we have a structured feedback protocol. and they can decide which feedback they want to incorporate and which feedback they're going to ignore. So they'll actually go through 3 iterations during the design sprint before they present to the CEO panel. So it's qualitative capturing and measuring improvements, because it's not the type of assessment that lends itself to a quantitative depiction, but it's built around the idea of rapid iteration. And so Josh, asked about, more clearly is great, but I'm not sure faster is always better. And I agree. In this instance, though, faster is better because it gets them to iterate on their prototypes faster than they otherwise would be able to do.
Absolutely. And I think just to build on to what you were mentioning about faster may not always be better, I think, but faster is definitely great. And I think when we're talking about social entrepreneurship or anything in the social realm, we need solutions that work for certain groups, right? Whenever we're looking at certain problems, as you're going to be doing in your structure and protocol, the students are first going to be identifying what the problem is. I think a major lag with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of organization comes with identifying the problem, right? We identify a large group problem, or at times, at least for a lot of organization, to understand to understand the entire theory of change. I think understanding that problem becomes crucial, right? And till we don't understand that problem, fixing it, no matter how clearly or no matter how fast, I think it doesn't give us a lasting or sustainable results that we aim to achieve. I think and that's similar for social emotional learning as well, I believe.
Yeah.
Um,
I see.
it, Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I see Avinash asked a question about the future of social emotional learning and AI and advice for educators. I think I probably should have said this at the beginning, but right now, and I credit my colleague Amanda Bickerstaff for this insight. Amanda is the CEO of AI for Education, and she's on our AI advisory team here for Middle States. She just pointed this out in our webinar with her last week, that there are no fit for purpose tools in AI in education. And so it's really important that educators understand that they need to supervise everything. There's no generative AI tool that you could just hand over to a student and let them do whatever they want with it, because none of them are fit for purpose. The only thing that gets sort of close to that would be Conmigo from Khan Academy. But that's useful really only for kind of like the lowest level of learning, those low level forms of assessment. And they're good and important. I think of it as sort of like, if you're an athlete, you have practices, you have scrimmages, and you have games, and your practices prepare you for your scrimmages, and your scrimmages prepare you for your games. Conmigo is sort of like doing drills and practice. Good, important, but it's a very limited understanding of what learning is like, because it's really the scrimmages and the games where you get to apply the learning that matters. So, as far as the future of SEL and AI, Avinash, I wish I had an answer to that question for you. But I hope that whatever it is, it will involve real care and concern for the what simulated intimacy will do with kids.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think if we're looking at simulations as well, right? Like a lot of, I think that might just be the future of SEL with schools, especially with a lot of schools going online with students having, time for extracurricular activities. Like, I mean, there are pros and cons for everything, but definitely the integration of, say, simulations for social emotional learning might just bring out the sense or the feeling towards what being in a social realm really means, right? And how do you even feel empathetic to a character that isn't even real, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just a thought on that. I believe I don't know if you have kids who have played, or adults here who have played the Club Penguin. This was something that we had played long back, but I remember feeling really empathetic to someone who, say, had lost some energy, or they were asking for some extra food that they required, And that's just an example, right? And this was a really, really old multiplayer RPG. So I think just building onto that, uh, someone has mentioned, I think Maud has mentioned that it's time to start AI subjects in schools, right? And I think we're at a stage, as you mentioned, that we're at a stage where building into, or at least trying to build AI with education is something that is still being explored more, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I suspect that not instead of AI subjects, but in addition to AI subjects, I think, we definitely need AI literacy. And beyond that, I think AI is just going to find its way into everything that we're teaching. So how do you teach English literature using generative AI? How do you teach physics using generative AI?
Yeah.
Pick your subject. It's hard for me to imagine that any of them won't ultimately include generative AI. And there was just a great article this past week from Inside Higher Ed about the crisis at the higher education level in arts institutes. So, think of like the elite arts institutes here in the United States, Pratt, Rhode Island School of Design, and others. And they realized that this is just reality now. They might have taught animation one way before, but now they have to teach it. They're going to have to teach it a completely different way. Costume design. You pick your subject, and they understand that the game has changed.
It definitely is ever evolving. And un- I think just digital literacy is something that is coming up now, right? Like a number of curriculums are out there now on digital literacy. And I think even with the onset of Google, there was a lot of worry about what do we do when we have like a search engine. And I think it's going to, it's just an insight that I have, but it's probably going to go in that direction when we start leveraging these tools, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being scared of them, right? How do we know where to draw the line for ourselves as well? And how do we even inculcate that in our students? Just the last question, I think one of the last questions, at least from my end, would be how can AI enhance curriculum development and assessment?
I think one of the best use cases for AI, generative AI in particular, in enhancing curriculum and lesson planning is using it as a thought partner or a brainstorming partner. I mentioned AI for education. They have a totally free and very high quality prompt library that has multiple categories in curriculum and lesson planning. And if you just copy and paste their prompts and then put in your specific subject area, you'll get endless output from ChatGPT in particular. But you can apply it to any of the large language models. And I think it's useful to remember that probably 80 to 90% of what it gives you is going to be average or maybe slightly better than average, but it's probably not going to meet your standards, and that's fine. You just need to look for the 10% that is really interesting and then ask it to say more about that or build on that or take that piece and then do another round of prompting. And the beauty of these tools is that they don't get tired. They don't get bothered by how many times you ask it to change things. And so the cost of brainstorming high quality curriculum and lesson planning is close to zero. And then the other huge advantage is that whereas it might have taken you, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, and it's usually longer than that when you're drafting curriculum or lesson plans to actually type out the stuff, this is doing it instantly for you. So it's saving you time as well, and let you get to that better final product faster. So I think there are use cases for teachers on curriculum and lesson planning right now. AI for Education is my favorite one to go to. I know there are others out there, and it's good for both brainstorming and time saving.
Absolutely. Definitely. I think AI for education is definitely a great tool to use for, even generating lesson plans that we
Yeah.
might be very comfortable in generating. Like we might we usually have a list of our structures that we can use for our classes, but I think it's a great brainstorming tool, as you mentioned, to use it as a support rather than as the primary tool guiding this learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I've learned a lot from you today, Christian. Definitely one thing that I would love to connect AI with would be with SEL and how social emotional learning. I think uh, there's this fear about how AI is going to restrict individuals from thinking more, from being more curious, from using their creativity in different. At least that's a very generic standpoint that I'm coming from, but it's also the thinking about how this might or might not degrade the level of thinking that we might want to achieve for each individual, right? Or
I
even
think it, yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern, and I think ultimately that says less about AI and more about how we set up learning experiences. And so I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic, and in particular about the space for schools to incorporate social emotional learning to support their students. Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Avinash, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, Christian. How you doing?
Great to
Great
see you
talk.
again.
Yeah, great talk. What I want to also pitch in is about the real-time assessment that happens while teaching using AI. I think when we were developing our curriculum, this was our foremost thought process that if you're teaching SCLE and you're doing a formative and a summative assessment in a semester, it's not an ideal way to actually know where the students stand and from the behavior issues point of view. So, and when you play the game, it tells a lot about you. And you can't assess that data at a scale of thousands and millions of kids without AI. So for us, how are we going to leverage the in-game analytics using AI is very crucial. And so yeah, I was actually looking forward to this discussion. So thank you so much. There's no question, just additional to that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Avinash. We just about have about 5 minutes. Is that all right, Christian? We just
Yeah,
have
sure.
about 5 minutes. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, you can unmute yourselves and do that, but you can also share it in the chat box. We're here to answer them.
While we wait for somebody to ask a question, something that's related to social emotional learning, but maybe in the space adjacent to it, is another opportunity for us in education, which is to teach young people how to really care for and steward their attention. Where we put our attention is ultimately who we become and what skills we develop. And obviously, the danger of generative AI is that we can just go down endless rabbit holes and have our attention totally subdivided into nothingness. But I think for that very reason, it's a great opportunity for us to help students to think about, where do you place your attention? How do you take care of it? How do you nurture it and steward it?
Absolutely. And just building on that, I think again there's an opportunity cost with whatever decision you make, whether you choose to use AI, whether you choose not to use AI or generative AI, whether you choose to go forward with the kind of teaching that you're already familiar with, or whether you want to build on whatever you think is relevant for your classroom or for the students that you teach. So definitely, I think at the end, what is the site that? Oh, I'll just send the message back. Yeah, and definitely, I think it's a great learning for us as well, because at the end of the day, we are trying to understand what the growth of each child is going to be, right? Especially for the field of SEL, we know that. It's either through questionnaires, it's either through observational data, which is all great, right? At the end of the day, it's all great. But from a psychological point of view, I think it also needs to be evolving, right? And not just psychologically, but also from the subject standpoint, right? How do we look at behavior from a different point of view?
Yeah, and games are a great way to capture that.
Absolutely. And yeah, we've got a great question here. Can you recommend a good AI voice-enabled chatbot? to try, especially
Um,
personalities?
yeah. So the second part of that question, I might have a bit of a difficult time answering, because I'm just not familiar with any that are voice enabled or voice first. But actually, ChatGPT has a feature called Whisper, which allows you to just talk. So it's easiest to use on your smartphone if you have ChatGPT on your smartphone, and whether you're holding it up to your mouth or you've got your AirPods in, or whatever device you use to connect through Bluetooth, and just talk to it. Just talk to it like you're talking to a person. And it's remarkable how well it can understand, even when you pause, when you say and and you kind of, you start a sentence and then you stop in the middle of that sentence, start another one. It still does a very good job of capturing what you're talking about. But that doesn't necessarily address the different personalities. The other app that I use that I find really great for voice is something called Audio Pen. And it's even better than ChatGPT's Whisper in terms of you just talk into it and it totally clarifies. I use it for writing sometimes. I just want to get a first draft out of something, and I'll talk for a little while and it'll convert it into some useful ideas. When it comes to different personalities, there's character AI, but I find, as I said earlier, something pernicious about the idea that you can't really tell who's real and who's totally fictional. There's a company called Replica, which I had a terrible experience with, and they've recently I think changed their settings, but Replica allows you to create that you're interacting with an AI, and you can choose. I think its most popular application was like find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but you could also find a friend or a mentor. I had signed up to get a mentor, and it just went to a dark place very quickly, so I closed that account down. So I'm not really familiar with any really good ones for different personalities, but maybe you'll find something that I haven't seen yet.
All right. Thanks for sharing that, Christian. And we will be closing out now. But thank you so much for accepting the invitation. We do have a question. Sorry about that. I think it'll be great if you can answer this. Then we'll close out.
Sure. Yeah. So image creation, I think the easiest to use is DALL-E, which you can get through Bing Chat. But also ChatGPT has it built into the version 4. That's the paid version. And then video creation would be Runway. But the number of credits you get in the free version is pretty limited. I'm not familiar with any other video generation sources that aren't paid. But again, DALL-E for image creation and Runway for video creation.
All right. So thank you once again. And probably this is the last time. I hope that I'm thanking you for being here. But thank you again, Christian, for being here. And I think I've taken a lot of information back for myself and my team. And we'll probably be using it in the way we deal with our curriculum as well and how we present it to others. But leveraging generative AI is definitely the way to go. I think it's just the understanding of how do you draw the line between the accessibility to others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you have a great rest of the day as well. Bye-bye.